Hello, and welcome to our Reader's History of Science Fiction. I'm Alex Howe, and this is Season 2, Episode 15, Religion in Science Fiction. So, I knew I wanted to do a full episode about religion in sci-fi this season, and I thought it would be seasonally appropriate with Christmas being yesterday, as of the air date. But I wasn't sure what I was actually going to do with it. I initially thought I would be looking at a few specific works that have direct religious themes like C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy, and I wasn't sure I'd even have a very long list. But when I looked closer at the themes of religion in sci-fi, I realized there was actually a lot more to it. There are several different categories where it applies, with more diverse works than I thought in those categories, and it turned into more of a survey episode. That's especially true because I've covered a lot of the books in question before, so it doesn't make sense to rehash them, although there are a few specific titles I want to highlight here as well. One reason this isn't the most intuitive topic is that science fiction doesn't seem like it would naturally mesh with religious themes the ways other genres might. After all, it's science fiction, where religion is a matter of faith. Some of the major tropes of sci-fi, like aliens or robots or mind uploading, it's not clear how they fit into the worldviews of many religions. And while I don't want to discount individual religious characters, they don't seem to be the default, and it's even less often that their faith is relevant to the plot. And all that's before you get to the idea of portraying gods or angels or demons directly in science fiction, since they're spiritual forces that don't mesh with science at all. Plus, it often means declaring that major world religions are verifiably true or false in a given fictional setting, and that gets messy. But as I said, there's a fair bit of science fiction that tackles religion in a number of different ways. Some of it delves surprisingly deep into spiritual phenomena, like Lewis's trilogy, while on the other extreme, some of it is not shy about rejecting religion. As you might expect, religious views in science fiction are just as diverse as they are in real life if you dig just a little beneath the surface. I want to note as an aside that a relatively large number of sci-fi works have invented new religions for the world building of the story. I don't consider this a separate category. A religion can be real or invented and still be handled the same way, and you can find a wide variety of these creations in the literature. Some, like Dune's Orange Catholic Bible, are extrapolations of present-day Earth religions. Others, like Parable of the Sower's Earth Seed, are completely novel. Some, like the Bajoran prophets in Star Trek or the gods of the Cthulhu mythos, are based around real spiritual beings in story. Others, like Baconanism in Cat's Cradle or the Church of Science in Foundation, are very consciously invented by the characters to serve some other purpose. Inventing a new religion is, well, for one, it can be fun world building, but more importantly, it gives you more flexibility. If you have a particular philosophical or spiritual idea that you want to study, you don't have to try to shoehorn it into an existing religion. If you want to play it unusual or exotic or, let's just say very opinionated, you don't have to worry about the implications of portraying a real religion in a certain light. But none of this is required either. All of the ideas I want to talk about can be conveyed through real-world religions. When I looked down the list of works, I saw 4 main categories to talk about. So in the rest of this episode, I'm going to give an overview of each of them, and as it happens, focusing on portrayals of real-world religions. The first, and in my opinion least interesting way you'll see religion portrayed in sci-fi, is essentially the ancient astronaut theory applied broadly. This is the idea that many ancient religions, especially polytheistic ones, were inspired by visitations from aliens in the distant past, and thus much of humanity's cultural and religious history is a fabrication. The classic example of this is the Stargate franchise, in which most of the famous gods from various pantheons were alien Goa'uld system lords trying to conquer Earth. But the idea pops up frequently elsewhere. You have the Vorlons from Babylon 5, the Engineers in Prometheus, the entire plot of Battlestar Galactica, and so on. And it doesn't have to be aliens. I've previously mentioned Michael Moorcock's Behold the Man, in which a time traveler steps into the historical role of Jesus after going back to the 1st century and discovering that the biblical Jesus didn't exist. This is the same kind of idea of explaining or rewriting a religion in realist or scientific terms, just a less popular one than delving into classical mythologies. Also, I should note that while Jesus is an uncommon case, a lot of these works aren't shy about doing this to non-Western religions that are still practiced today. For example, Stargate featured Goa'uld villains in the roles of the Shinto sun goddess Amaterasu and the Hindu goddess Kali. Now granted, they could have been filling pre-existing roles in the story, like the character of the pre-Christian god Sokar stepping into the role of Satan. Still, that's something that writers should probably be more cautious about today. On the opposite end of the scale, you have works that try to reify religions as verifiable powers in the setting, but still as spiritual forces transcending science. I spoke about two works that do this at length in episode 10 of the first season. There was C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy, where the plot was driven by biblical angels and demons, and there was also Olaf Stapledon's Star Maker, which is a deeply pantheistic work, but still features a vision of the Star Maker creator as a distinct being at the end. Arthur C. Clarke did a lot of this, falling in with his sufficiently advanced technology line. The precursors in the Space Odyssey series and the Overmind in Childhood's End are both godlike beings that are presumably explainable by science in theory, but not science at anywhere near a human level of understanding, so that the distinction between scientific and spiritual becomes essentially meaningless. This is also the general approach used in the Thor movies. However, Clarke also went in other directions. His famous short story, The 9 Billion Names of God, deals with a pseudo-Buddhist prophecy about the end of the world actually coming true when the conditions are fulfilled, implying that the religion behind it was right all along. There are also some perhaps sillier cases that deal specifically with demons, such as the movie Event Horizon, where the eponymous ship travels faster than light by seemingly taking a detour through hell, and the ship itself becomes possessed. Similarly, in the Doom video game series, the player starts in a sci-fi setting, but has to fight their way through the legions of hell after a teleportation experiment goes wrong. However, there's one sci-fi classic that I didn't get a chance to talk about in Season 1, and indeed, I didn't read it myself until this week. The Riverworld series by Philip Jose Farmer. At the beginning of the first Riverworld book, To Your Scattered Bodies Go, from 1971, every human who ever lived, with the exception of those who were too young or not mentally competent, is resurrected on an alien planet that has been terraformed into a single enormous river valley, an afterlife that no one expected, but appears to be absolutely real. The resurrections seemed to stop in the late 20th or early 21st century, as humanity was wiped out by a first contact with aliens gone wrong. However, it's later revealed that many of these stories were misinformation spread by the designers of Riverworld. Even so, the largest fraction of the resurrectees are from the 20th century due to the higher world population then. On Riverworld, the single giant river zigzags back and forth across the planet for millions of miles, bounded on each side by impassable mountains. The world is designed to keep humans well provided for, but technologically primitive. There's essentially no metal to make anything beyond stone tools, and there are no land animals or farmable plants. But each human is given a container called a grail that can be filled 3 times a day with food, toiletries, and various soft drugs by some seemingly magical technology. The humans are initially resurrected grouped together by time and place, but they are gradually mixed up, as anyone who dies on Riverworld is resurrected the next day at a random place elsewhere on the river. This fact is soon exploited to escape desperate situations, or sometimes even just to travel to a different part of the planet. Since Farmer had every human who ever lived to play with, many of the characters in Riverworld are historical figures. The main protagonist of the series is the famous British explorer and literary scholar Richard Francis Burton, who embarks on a quest to find the source of the river and its creators. His lover is Alice Pleasance Hargreaves, née Liddell, the real-life inspiration for Alice in Wonderland. And his antagonist-turned-ally is a reformed Hermann Goering, commander of the Luftwaffe under Nazi Germany. On the other hand, one of Burton's other allies is not a historical figure, but instead is possibly the most blatant self-insert character in the literature. Professionally published literature, I mean. As Philip Jose Farmer wrote himself into the story as a little-known author named Peter Gyrus Frigate. And like Dante, he even gets a chance to punch out one of his enemies in the afterlife. This is odd because admitted self-insert characters are rare in fiction, leaving aside the standard first-person narrative devices. Kurt Vonnegut did it a fair bit, and Larry Niven and Jerry Purnell gave themselves bit parts in Footfall, but rarely do you see such blatant numbers-filed-off examples like this one. And if thinly veiled self-inserts like Bella Swan or Robert Langdon are often considered lazy writing, I don't know what to make of one that doesn't even try to hide it. In any case, you can probably tell this is already a pretty unique exploration of the afterlife, but it goes much deeper. The reason for the resurrections is also described with red herrings to throw off anyone investigating them, but it's eventually revealed that Riverworld is a moral test to help humanity reach enlightenment in a technological pseudo-Buddhist cosmology. Buddha is specifically called out as having reached enlightenment on Earth. In Farmer's cosmology, souls, all souls everywhere, are created by super advanced technology. Long ago, a species that managed to develop advanced technology without self-awareness invented souls, which they named Wathans, and their successors have been spreading them across the universe ever since. Most species are given direct power over Wathans and resurrection technology for themselves, but the aliens decided that humans were too violent to be trusted with it, so they created Riverworld to help us reach enlightenment instead. Although even the aliens have dissension in their ranks. There are 5 main Riverworld books dealing with several intermingled storylines, plus some short stories and an alternate early version of the story called River of Eternity that was created due to publishing shenanigans. I only read the first book myself, but it felt more focused on the practical side of things. The spiritual side is important, but secondary, especially given how Burton is convinced of a technological explanation for everything that's happening. Maybe it's different in the later books. Anyway, I thought it was a good story. However, just be warned, as you might guess for a story where drowning in the river is a form of transportation, this one has all the content warnings. Another related category of religion in sci-fi is the transhumanist angle, where the circumstances of the story somehow create either a deity or an eternal destiny for humankind, which is also sort of Riverworld, but I'm talking about creating something new in the course of the story, which I think is subtly different. This category really extends down further into ordinary transhumanism. I talked about transhumanism a lot more in episode 39 of Season 1, with the singularity and its promise of limitless technology, including life extension and mind uploading. The singularity is often described in religious terms, albeit often ironically with phrases like the rapture of the nerds, but it can be serious too. The classic example of this, which plays directly with traditional religion, has to be Isaac Asimov's short story The Last Question, where AC, a computer built by humans, is tasked by humanity to find a way to reverse entropy, finally finds one, and speaks, "Let there be light." That's maybe the clearest case of a quote-unquote real god being created by technology. But as I said, the stories don't have to go this far. Warhammer 40k or the later Dune books with their physical god emperors with superhuman powers also qualify at a low level. Charles Stross's Accelerando talks a lot about the implications of quote-unquote weakly godlike intelligences created by the singularity. And there's another book I want to highlight here that shares a lot in common with the modern transhumanist ideas, but dates all the way back to 1967. Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny. Lord of Light is a science fantasy, and in fact, Zelazny was deliberately ambiguous in his writing and wrote it so that it could be taken as pure sci-fi, or something close to pure fantasy. It's about an interstellar colony that is ruled by a powerful group of elites who have modeled themselves on the Hindu pantheon. These so-called gods' technology allows them to reincarnate via mind transfer and gives them superhuman abilities, including enhanced bodies called aspects, sort of similar to the concept of manifestations of gods in Hinduism, and powers thematic to their identities called attributes. For example, one of the protagonists, Yama, the god of death, has an attribute that allows him to kill someone by looking them in the eyes. These attributes are often based around physical objects, in which case they seem to parallel the symbolic attributes of gods in Hinduism. However, if someone with deeper knowledge of Hinduism has any insight, please leave a comment. My knowledge is frankly very surface level here. Anyway, the gods subjugate the people by the use of their powerful attributes, by controlling access to reincarnation, and by hoarding all technology above a medieval level. They also nearly wiped out and banished the native non-humans on the planet, with the survivors being labeled quote-unquote demons. The main protagonists of Lord of Light are the aforementioned Yama and Sam, a renegade member of the gods who believes their technology should be shared with the people. Sam takes on the role of Buddha, and reintroduces Buddhism to the people as a way to break the hegemony of the gods. He is initially opposed by Yama, but Yama switches sides to oppose the gods after being betrayed by his lover, Kali. So, you should be warned, Lord of Light uses gender dynamics in a way that simply wouldn't work today. Wouldn't even make a lot of sense today, I think. Where the gods can reincarnate into male and female bodies equally, or even animals, although this is used as a punishment, but their marriages are strictly heterosexual, and therein lies Yama's quarrel. You see, Yama briefly marries Kali in the course of the story. However, shortly afterwards, Brahma is murdered and unable to be reincarnated. The other gods convince Kali to replace him, but this means that the female Kali must reincarnate as the male Brahma and the marriage is over. That would be much harder to make work today. In any case, working together, Yama and Sam break the power of the gods in heaven, killing many of them and leaving them as no longer being the sole power on the planet. Personally, I enjoyed the book, but you do need to be aware that you'll be seeing some, very different gender attitudes going in. This story also highlights the fourth category, possibly the most important category of stories about religion in sci-fi I identified. Lord of Light not only sees humans creating gods, that is, creating themselves as gods, but also shows how they use their power as gods to rule and oppress the people. The final category of religion in sci-fi doesn't have to do with playing with the ideas of religion, but instead focuses on how religion shapes individuals and societies in a sci-fi setting. Here, it's much less important whether the religion is true, and much more important who follows it and why and how. These are the stories where the actual implications and interactions of real-world religions with science fiction tropes take place. For example, James Blish's A Case of Conscience from 1958 features a Jesuit priest who wrestles with the question of where aliens fit into God's design, or rather, a very particular sort of aliens. I reviewed A Case of Conscience on my blog a few years ago, but briefly, Father Ramon Ruiz Sanchez is a member of a contact team from Earth to the alien planet of Lithia. The native Lithians perplex Ruiz Sanchez because their society seems impossible to him. Somehow, the Lithians manage to follow all aspects of Catholic moral teaching without being taught it, except that they don't believe in God. In fact, they don't even have a concept of God. Ruiz Sanchez thus concludes that the whole planet must be the work of Satan, to deceive Christians into thinking goodness is possible without God. I'll leave you to decide how you feel about that conclusion. However, this is not good for him because ascribing creative power to Satan is a heresy in Catholic doctrine. He's summoned before the Pope, and the Pope tells him the obvious alternative solution: the whole planet is possessed by the devil, not created by him. Blish ends the book in a way that, well, it would be clever if it weren't so contrived, and so dependent on an incorrect 1950s understanding of the science. Long story short, Lithia is destroyed. However, Blish deliberately leaves it ambiguous whether it was destroyed by divine judgment or an industrial accident. But of course, even with that, the story is more about how the church reacts to the aliens than about the aliens themselves. As I said, declaring that a seemingly perfect alien society is the work of Satan is, well, let's just say a lot of non-Christians wouldn't see eye to eye on that. And naturally, depictions of religion in science fiction are far too broad across the genre to boil down to a single story or a single theme. In The Handmaid's Tale, religion is extremely negative, with the United States being taken over by a brutal theocracy. Meanwhile, in A Canticle for Leibowitz, religion is very positive, with the Catholic Church being the only institution preserving scientific knowledge in the aftermath of a nuclear war, and you can find stories that are anywhere in between. This is a topic that flows into the larger commentary of sci-fi on culture as a whole, and it sort of feels too big to fit into a podcast episode. Plus, you can find a fair number of these stories in my earlier episodes. So instead, I want to highlight one more book, which is neither positive nor negative per se, but one of the weirdest treatments of religion I've seen in sci-fi. The Terra Ignota series by Ada Palmer. Terra Ignota, starting from Palmer's debut novel Too Like the Lightning in 2016, is set on a 25th century Earth that is upside down and inside out compared with the world we're familiar with. There are many things going on in this story, but the main thing with respect to religion is that after a series of religious wars in the 22nd century, the world got so fed up with the whole thing that they didn't ban religion, but they banned all public expression of religion and religious gatherings. All religious practice and instruction is done privately between individuals and chaplain-like officers called senseiers. Or rather, public expressions of religion are not technically forbidden. The 8 universal laws that everyone follows do not mention them, but they're deeply taboo, and any self-respecting organization will have a rule against it. By the 25th century, the system has been in place for so long that everyone accepts it as a matter of course. No word on how the Christians feel about the whole make disciples of all nations thing. Now, honestly, there's too much going on in Terra Ignota to fully describe here, not least because I only read the first of the 4 books. The other main piece of the world building is that flying cars have increased mobility to the point where geographic nations are obsolete, and have been replaced by 7 non-geographic hives, to which people can declare and undeclare allegiance whenever they want. Each one has different ideals and a different form of government: monarchy, republic, corporation, academia, and so on. The hives are finely balanced in an increasingly tenuous peace. But then, into this world is thrown what I think is one of the biggest world-building non-sequiturs I've ever seen, in the form of Bridger, a 13-year-old boy who has the power to bring inanimate objects to life and to make any product of his imagination real, even up to a resurrection potion. This isn't completely unheard of, to have real miracles in a sci-fi story. A Canticle for Leibowitz had a couple of unexplained miracles in it, for example. But Bridger is a complete anomaly. He has one of the strongest superpowers in the literature, but it's never really explained. Some people in the story believe him to be divine when he's exposed, prompting a crisis of faith. And yet he's not even the most important of the many plot threads of the series. Honestly, I don't know what to do with this series. Some of the people in my book club had trouble taking it seriously when we read it, because it's such a twisted reflection of our world. Oddly enough, I didn't have that problem with Too Like the Lightning, where I did with The Wind-Up Girl and The City and the City. But on the flip side, I'm still not sure what to do with it. I was engaged and intrigued, but it's hard to describe what it's saying about society, much less religion, especially having only read the first book. It's just something I thought should be covered here because it's one of the wildest takes on the subject that I've seen. So that's where I'll leave it off. This has been A Reader's History of Science Fiction. This podcast is hosted by Libsyn and is available on all the major platforms. You can find me on YouTube at Science Meets Fiction, and if you're still in the Christmas mood, you can check out my video about Christmas music there from last week. I'm also on Twitter and Mastodon at Sci Meets Fiction, and my own website is sciencemeetsfiction.com. Out of the specific books I've covered here, My recommendation for this episode is Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny. It's a self-contained story compared with most of the others, fun in some places, yet deep and insightful in others. As you might expect for speculative fiction where religion features heavily, all of them go to some pretty weird places, but I feel like Lord of Light is a good place to start if you want to get a flavor for it. In the next episode, I'll be doing another catch-up, and this one will be... let's go with children's sci-fi movies. Something light for the post-holiday season. Thanks for listening.